Ladies and gentlemen, our event is about to begin within a few minutes. Please return to your seat, mute your microphone, and kindly switch your mobile phone to silent mode. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen in Asia. Good evening, Canada, US, and the remaining of the world. My name is Duan Trinh. Now I'm a director of Institute of Smart City and Management, University of Economical University, ISCM, UH, Vietnam. The first half of the 21st century will be the most important in the history of the human race because of all challenges we face from the amazing leap in the technology and the urban challenges in a rapidly urbanizing and globalized world. We have all don't know about what world will be like in the future. Which city model type should be considered to develop for the sustainable development, as well as the quality of life. On the event series 2021 Smart City Plus, which organized by ISCM, UEH, and local and international partners, I am glad to share with you on our webinar a new understanding of the imperative of health city device, holistic, adaptive, and resilient community planning strategy. This webinar is co-organized by B+H. A great company is not only designing bold and inspiring space for people, and also want to contribute for better education together with UEH. In the webinar, I am sure that you will enjoy the interesting point of views and also rich experience that shared from B+H specialists. Before we start the webinar, I would like to encourage all of attendees to raise your questions in the chat box of the platform. We are very glad to receive all your questions to discuss and clarify the sustainable way to go to the future by designing a healthy city in the panel discussion in the end of the speaker series. all of the speakers, I'd like to remind you all that we have only 45 minutes for all of the group presentation. I know that it's not much, but we totally want to spend more time for the panel discussion. That's always very fantastic and interesting in each webinar. With our three experienced speakers, Mr. Stephen Townsend, Mr. Tom Hook, and Mr. Nguyễn Hoàng Quân, they will share continuously flow from overview of critical disruptors affecting how we build our future city from the different issues as climate change, urbanization, digital revolution, to the integrated strategy and new planning principle to fuel healthy and resilient urban development globally and in Vietnam, and prove the concept in Vietnam case. Now, I would like to introduce short bio of our speakers today. First, Mr. Stephen Townsend. Be a pledge principal and Asia director. I am lucky to have a chance to get to know Mr. Stephen in our previous webinar of the TechFed 2021. So I've been very inspired and also interesting and also impressive with your smart city development strategy. Stephen is a seasoned planning professional and industry leader in urban design with 40 years of the experience and award-winning urban design and master plan projects for multinational clients. His experience encompasses all aspects of the urban design, including conceptual architecture design, land planning, transportation planning, development programming, and landscape concept design. Secondary, Mr. Tom Hook. Tom Hook is the Global Director of the Be a Place Planning, Urban Design and Landscape Division. He has over 25 years of international experience as a master planner, landscape architect, and project manager for large scale of urban development in Asia, North America, and the Middle East. Tom is an accomplished, recognized thought leader who integrates strategy with urban planning principles to create the adaptable and future flexible development framework that build on a sense of place to connect the people with other and natural world. Last but not least, Mr. Quân Nguyen, a registered architect and urban planner who currently leads Be a Place Planning and Landscape Practical in Vietnam. He is one of the very important persons to support our Thai collaboration for the education between the Be a Place and UEH. Anh Quân is a seasoned professional with over a decade of multidisciplinary experience, leading larger-scale projects across North America and Asia, including several major master plan developments in Ho Chi Minh City and throughout Vietnam. He plans his international perspective with the innate connection to Vietnamese culture to create the solution that are both contextual and holistic. So now we can start our webinar by the first sharing of Stephen and other following. Here is your stage, and please enjoy the webinar, the sharing.
Thank you and welcome everybody. It's not only time to think smart, it's time to start living smarter. Next slide. So this is all about healthy city design. Albert Einstein said, we cannot solve problems with the same thinking that created them. Steve Jobs has the famous line, think different. Today, we need to start rethinking how we design and build and live in cities. This is critical. Disruptions the disruptors that are affecting how we build our future cities are very clear. Climate change is a real issue. I will show you a slide later on that's going to give you a shocking revelation about what's going to happen here in Vietnam. Urbanization. Most of the people growing up in Vietnam will now start to live in cities. The digital revolution, is it helping us? Are we using the tools effectively, or is it keeping us from creating a more vibrant social society? We need to evaluate these issues. Climate change is a real one. Next. Vietnam has almost 70% of its population living in coastal cities. Just this year, In 2020, the abnormal typhoons cost Vietnam over $30 trillion in damages, killed almost 200 people in the Da Nang central region. According to the United Nations, almost 7.7 million people in 9 provinces, with over 2.5 million of our children, will be affected by future climate change. The problem is not getting better, it's getting worse. Next. Flooding impact studies. This is the reality of the 2050 impact of seawater rise, climate change, more severe storm cycles, and we're starting to see that happening even now in Vietnam. Next. Rapid urbanization. In the global population, 70% of that population starts to live in cities. Around the world, Vietnam will be part of that future picture. Next. You can already see almost a 40% population increase in Ho Chi Minh City alone. My prediction is that by 2030, Ho Chi Minh City will probably be one of 2 of the largest cities south of Guangzhou, China. That's in almost 10 years. So we must be aware, how do we house and how do we employ all that future population? And then how do we transport those people through these new city networks? Next. This is our big problem. How many of you driven a private car here today? Motorbike? One person drove. Okay, private car. What kind of car is it? A BMW. Is it a 7 Series?
It's 5 Series.
5 Series, okay. All right. Most of you probably came by taxi or motorbike. But is that the solution for mobility through Ho Chi Minh City in the future? We can now begin to investigate alternative mobility systems and new technologies that can actually even move people more effectively than the planned metro services. Something we need to start thinking about. We need to open our minds to how we move around these future places.
And recently, we also think about the new model of the new city to really kind of have no impact to the infrastructure, so people don't have to move a lot.
Absolutely.
So actually, you live and move in one place.
Yep.
So the model that we've been doing now is not only in Ho Chi Minh City, but we just make a reservation that in parts at all. So that model we be applying to Vietnam market pretty soon.
Absolutely. Integration is very key. Live within walking distance of your workplace. One of the things that we've done in District 1 without allowing a lot of new office space being built in the center city is we now have taken some of the vibrancy out of the city. So that's something we need to reinvest in. More housing, more office space at an appropriate scale. The center city can save the central district from collapse of its amenity infrastructure. That's going to be a critical issue that's coming up in the next years. Next. So we are approaching a digital revolution, but again, we must ask ourselves, how are we using that technology? Is it helping us solve these technical problems, or is it keeping us from socially interacting and working out solutions in a more integrated way together personally? A good question to ask. Next. And here we are, 70% of all of Vietnam. This is amazing for a population in a developing nation to have access to the internet. And we have very free access to the internet. We are very lucky compared to most Asian countries have the accessibility we do. Next. And as a result of this, even the Vietnam government is now adapting and making more accessible access to government process, government systems, government services. So we are really ahead of the game. We should be very proud of ourselves.
Last year we started doing the projects in the east of the city. That probably you know right now is the city, right? So actually there will be 10 sites that the government really focus on to be kind of catalyst of the eastern city development. So we were lucky to do one project in that region, and Steve later on going to talk about the model of how we got to think about the smart city. It's not smart in only using the technology, but in the master planning. How we make it smart, how we bring that innovation ideas into the new development of kind of new city thinking. The same concept we just did last week, the North of Equal Park development. Right? So Steve's going to talk about that project.
And then just one last thing about smart city. It's not only smart infrastructure, smart mobility, smart energy, smart. You could smart label everything, but actually smart city is not about the technology. It's about living smarter. There will be a day when we will not need private automotive transport to carry us from where we live to where we work. There will be a day where we do not desire that as a mode of transport because it's no longer convenient. Technology can help us live better together, communicate better together, and become more socially interactive if we manage it properly.
And that's going to lead into this kind of new type of city setting that we call urban centers. So you have to move into the anymore because you have everything around you. Everything you can find just by just in your walking step.
So that's the warm-up. I'd like to now introduce you to Tom Hook, who is in Toronto.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I just want to follow up, and I really wish I could be there in person, and unfortunately, we all know the situation these days that travel isn't possible, and unfortunately here in Canada, different than we are in Asia, we have not been in the office for a full year. So it's been an interesting year for all of us, but here in Canada, it's been very interesting. So, as we start to work remotely, we start to think about and rethink about what we really see within our cities. And what is changing is, we are out there now, we're out walking around, we're in our communities within our own areas of living. And it's really interesting that you hear people talking about what is a community and what do we need. So, there's a bit of a shift or a rethink of how we should be looking at our cities and our developments. Next slide. So if you really think of the bottom line, and this applies anywhere, whether we're in Vietnam or we're in the Middle East or we're in Canada or the US or Europe, people come first. And we should be designing and thinking about our cities and our communities about people. And again, what everybody wants, whether you're here or there, is the same thing. We want clean water, we want clean air, we want clean land, and we all want a nice place to live that has the amenities that we all feel are important within our community. So we need to start thinking about that again. We got to get back to the basics and really think about people and thinking about how we develop communities. Next slide. So, Quan and Steve were talking about some of these things, but there's basically 8 drivers of success that can really make sure that the designs that we do or the projects that we develop are successful. And these 8 drivers are mobility, which, Steve was talking about, and the changes in mobility and what does that mean? The public realm, resilient design, sustainable design, and some of these overlap. It's like Steve was saying, smart city isn't just about smart technology. It's about thinking smart. It's about having the right mix in a community. So these all go together. And there's a matrix approach, and we got to do some research and look at our existing communities. What are they missing? What do they need? And then an integrated approach. Do we have the right team that's going to work on a project? Next slide. So again, the idea of the integrated approach, it's very important that we all go back to the other slide again.
Slide.
Previous slide. Just go back to that previous slide.
Previous, trước của mày mà này.
They have to go back. Back.
Trước em đang lại sau rồi.
That's the show, folks.
Yep, we're done.
Yes,
Just talking about integrated approach, and I have a little bit of a story here, which I think is very interesting. So if we talk about design, we obviously have, a team, whether that's architects, planners, urban designers, engineers, market feasibility. All of this makes up the team to develop a project. And, we all have to have a shared vision. And a project that we did a number of years ago here in Canada was a retrofit or a redevelopment of a golf course. The golf course industry here in Canada has been slowing down, so there's an idea that the residential would be more of an appropriate use. A developer came in, we did a marketing study, and we came up with a nice, sustainable, resilient design that we were able to keep all of the natural features of the site. There was a creek, there were some waterways, there was some vegetation. And what happened was when we moved from the marketing into the engineering and the other technical parts of this master plan, the client brought in an engineer that was not at all interested in any sort of sustainable systems or techniques, didn't think of green infrastructure, didn't think of anything that would save the existing conditions of the site. So we went back and forth a number of times to try to keep our vision. And unfortunately, these engineers wanted to clear cut the entire site. They wanted to backfill by a meter and develop this whole site as a big subdivision. And it was very frustrating for us as innovators in trying to do good design. Anyway, at the end of the day, we had to walk away from the project. It's very unfortunate. We talked to the client many times, but again, if you don't have that shared vision and you don't have the team that wants to do a certain strategy or certain innovative design, you can run into problems. So that integrated approach and everybody having that vision is very important. Next slide. Next slide. So, we were talking about these communities and the year has been interesting everywhere in the world. And we need to do an analysis, and let's look at our cities and our communities and see what we're missing. What are we missing in our communities? What do we need? Do we have the right mix of uses? Do we have the facilities that we want? Do we have the parks, the amenities? So we need to do that research, that analysis to see what's missing so that we can make sure those existing communities can get better and be better for that community and again for the people. Next slide. So one thing that we've started to apply for many, go back to the slide again. Yeah, so one thing that we started to apply a lot of times was, not only do we need to do that research and analysis, but we need to get the community engaged. We need to get the people that are living in those communities, get their feedback and find out what they need. What are they feeling that they're missing? What do they feel that they need more of? So that, again, part of that analysis is this community engagement. Next slide. So another approach that's very important is really breaking down those communities into a matrix approach. Once we start to look at the population and the amount of population we have, that should trigger, how many schools we need, how many hospitals we need, how many parks we need. And if we can break that down and start doing catchment areas, looking at how those community facilities get distributed, how we can actually start to make sure that the communities we are designing are walkable, are best for the community, and it's a live, work, and play. The more that we can get people to live in their community and not have to commute for an hour or two or whatever, the better we are for those communities. So that matrix approach and showing these catchment areas is very important, and we can overlay those onto our master plan, and it's a check to make sure that we do have the right distribution. Next slide.
This point is, Tom, I just want to talk a little bit about this because this model That's been applying in Vietnam in the past few years. Like we did few master plan projects.
Yes.
Or in Quảng province, we really introduced the concept of catchment radius, especially applied to schools. Because as you know, in Vietnam, school distributed by administration kind of boundaries, right? So with this kind of catchment radius to allow you to move in your walking distance. For example, for the kindergarten or elementary school, in like 500 meters, catchment radius, you can just walk and go to your school. So you have to cross the street to get to your school. Like for middle school, that can be 800 meters. High school can be like 1500 meters. So you kind of allocate all the school system in kind of catchment radius. So you can go from one place to another place. That new concept is well received by the people in the past few years.
Well, we can also apply that approach to the commercial development and amenity provision space as well. We all know that people tend to get tired after about an 800-meter walk down a retail street. So all that's one aspect where we can integrate all that into a more thorough and integrated approach to the master planning of these new areas.
And in master planning language, that turned out to be how we define this kind of urban grid. How many meters, to really kind of accommodate that kind of catchment radius. You can talk about in your District 9 project.
We'll talk a little bit about modularity and the pedestrian transparency. So.
This time.
Yeah. No, it's good to talk to go through it. And if you look at some of these little diagrams, you start to see how if we start to overlay these catchments, you start to make sure it's really a check to make sure that we are actually providing the right facilities within that community. So it's very important to make sure, again, it's people first, and to make sure that they get the amenities and the community facilities, the education centers, all of this stuff. And it's within a walking distance that makes sense. Like Juan said, it varies between a kindergarten to a high school to a religious center, which could be a church or a community facility. All of these things, but you can really use this matrix to be able to make sure and quantify that you have the right distribution of these community facilities or amenities within a master plan. Next slide. And we talk about smart city and how smart city is important, and smart city just isn't about smart. There's a lot of terms out there, whether that's sustainable master planning, resilient master planning. And one of the things that we've done at B+H is we've started to look at resilient design based on a biomimicry lens. And we have a partnership with Biomimicry Frontiers out of Canada here that works on a number of our projects in Vietnam or elsewhere in the world. But it's really looking at a natural way of designing. How would we use natural systems as opposed to engineering systems for stormwater management, for example? There's a lot of discussion, as Steve mentioned, about flooding and about climate change and these intense storms. Well, the engineering solutions are only able to hold so much of that, stormwater that runs off at an intense storm. If we can look at a natural system that can take that stormwater and we can put it into an open space or into a park, which is very resilient, which could accommodate intense amount of stormwater, it's a better solution than trying to do it with an engineering solution. And the benefits of it are endless. You're purifying the water before it's going into the water table. You're using a natural system. It's, in a lot of sense, it's a lot cheaper. And it's just a better way of looking at how we can, use a natural system to do something that we've been doing a lot of time, which was engineering and piping. So that biomimicry approach and that green infrastructure, LED systems is very important. So the biomimicry lens that we're using to really set the framework for these projects is very important. And we're going to show you one of the projects that we did in Vietnam that we used biomimicry as a lens or as a principle to actually design the master plan.
I just want to add another point there, because actually it's not in the past 4 years we've been doing biomimicry, but actually we started the process from 10, 15 years ago when three of us back in the HOK time, that we use another tool called FIT, fully integrated thinking, to really look into all the lenses, look into the social, economics, and environment. And we did the project not too long ago in RIVERFRONT in Agile, when we really apply FIT into that kind of system thinking. Biomimicry is the next step that we move forward, and I think, we think that model really good to apply for Vietnam market.
And Quan, you bring up a good point. I mean, we had looked at biomimicry a number of years ago, probably 15 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. I mean, we're all getting a bit old, I guess. But anyway, it was a while ago, and I don't think we were there yet as a community to think about how biomimicry could work. But as we've gotten more mature and we figured out different ways and seeing the climate change, this biomimicry system and these biomimicry principles now seem to be the forefront of how we should be really designing. So there's been a real change over the years to what biomimicry can do, and for us, we really see a value in how we can create a design that's very resilient because we're using natural systems as opposed to those engineering systems. Next slide.
Does everybody understand what biomimicry is? You get a sense of what that is.
Thanks, Tom. I think this is a perfect transition into this kind of a case study that I was going to talk about. We call this water gauntlet projects. It's right in Zone 9, in Texas, District 7 projects, and you see that's Zone 9 people right there. They kind of struggling at the beginning to talk to the investor. How do we define this new framework for this 200 hectares of development that the Zone 9 is not there? It's wetlands, with really kind of rich canal system. It's the drainage population of the southern Vietnam. So how we kind of define the framework of this master plan, and how we bring the value to this new development for investor, and luckily the investor listen to us and really kind of get excited about what we told them about biomimicry to really define the new framework of this 200 hectare. Next, please. We really look into all this kind of the nature, as you see, the nature by itself is all identity, and we base on that. Just like in this project, we look into this kind of natural environment and the canal system of the project site. Everything ties back into Zone 9 River, and at the end of the day, we cannot go against the nature. We have to work with the nature.
And Quan, one of the big things about this site was it was there was a lot of canals, there were a lot of waterways, there were a lot of natural systems already in place in that site. And instead of going in and just backfilling it, we actually enhance those waterways and use them as an asset or as a feature within the project. Correct?
When we went to the site, it's all mangroves everywhere. With the canal system. And one of the things like we see in Vietnam is actually is kind of flooding issue, and the government is kind of struggling in dealing with that. So we came up with the ideas like why we don't use the nature to really create a solution for that kind of issue, and using landscape as infrastructure, which is a new trend that we apply to all of our projects recently, to really use nature to treat nature. Next, please. So we came up with this concept master plan. We really use the water system to create a framework. We don't define kind of urban grid anymore for this kind of project, but we use nature to create its own grid system, and we create communities around this natural system that you can see right here, which, we're using the canal system to really define, this grid. We don't destroy that. We just enhance and create more of the waterways. But really connect back to the River in very natural way. At the end of the day, that's still about kind of the water management issue. So we don't have to spend a lot of money upfront for infrastructure. And we create this kind of a cluster of community around that, and using the canal system and the landscape to really frame that community, and that creates kind of a facing plan for the climate to develop over time. And actually in that 50-meter setback of the RIVERFRONT, we keep it really natural and turn that into more like an education center. So at the end of the day, or at the weekends, the kids from Ho Chi Minh City can come here, and really learn something about the natural ecologies here. So that's the purpose, and we create this kind of a center, for that kind of education purpose. We can still have this kind of urban setting, but in a very natural way. Just like you can see it in Singapore, to create this kind of central canal system. We have all this kind of F&B and things there. So the way that we do the master plan is just to be the balance between, the interest for the investor, at the same time, we keep, the interest for the nature and for the community mixed in. Again, we propose the placing plan just based on that kind of framework that we create based on the natural way. Next, please. And we introduce a stormwater management strategies, basically based on kind of the system and landscape framework that we create throughout the projects. Next, please. Also, we define the street typologies as part of that. Based on we usually define our road hierarchy based on the needs of people and how people move from one space to another space, and how to connect all this community together. And in this project, we create a very rich and continuous system for pedestrian to work from north to south, east to west. Next, please. In this slide, I just want to show this kind of the ideas that I mentioned about to really kind of using the water coconuts, mangrove to create very natural kind of landscape features. You see over here, very low impact to the environment, but create this kind of education tool to the kids over the weekend so that they can learn, this kind of the environment, the project. And actually, you see this kind of residential development just right behind that, landed into the nature. And the people have better access to the water system. You have to see, they have the water features, but people cannot get into the water. We do differently. People can actually have access and they can enjoy the water. Next, please. Same way over here that we see this rendering, but you really create this kind of, we call it soft edge condition for the landscape. So you don't see concrete anymore. You see this kind of very natural setting using mangroves and all this kind of species that live along the water to really reflect that kind of feelings that you in Vietnam, not in Singapore or in the US anymore, right? Because this is Vietnam. And that gives its own identity to the community of Vietnam. Next, please.
Good. Okay. So, if all of you know the District 9 area, which is now becoming the core of the
Tuduc City.
Tuduc City. Yeah. So, it feels like I'm on another planet. But if you know District 9, Tuduc City and the core of the Innovation District, it's expanding. It's really the forefront of the eastern expansion of Ho Chi Minh City. This is our new industrial and innovation future. And that is the main resource of the country's financial growth over the next probably several decades. So we were challenged to create a new urban center for that innovation district. Next, please. One of the things, maybe I should just stand up. This is our site right here. It's near the Godai River. It's on Highway 1. As you probably have traveled, and you go to Tao or to Potron. This is Tanda. This is the 210 area. These are all the current innovation city projects that are underway. Our big challenge is how would we get people to want to come and live out here, even if it's here. How can I get you to move from District 7 or District 1 or 3 or Taotian to come out and live in a place like this next? So we thought of three big major agendas. Innovation, of course, which is the driving force of the entire area. Sustainability, and then resilience. Sustainability of that we need to integrate and balance workplace and living, and resilience in that it has to resist to inevitable change that will happen. Next. So our vision, a fully integrated public realm, accessible educational opportunities based on a lot of the matrices that you saw earlier today presented by Tom. Connectivity enhancements, distribution between district purpose. In other words, each sub-district in this area would have a specific purpose and a specific identity. Serious attention to increasing public amenity, that's shopping and retailing, cultural, all kinds of things that we love about the center city, we need to also re-provide. It's so far away from the place we love. And then, of course, the reduction of private car and consideration of new alternatives. Next. So this is all about celebrating life. This is going to be a CBD of, I can't remember how many thousand people, I think at least 120,000 in the population. Next. Go through these very quickly because we're running out of time. Yeah. Oh, Tom, yeah. Tom, do you want to say something?
No, go ahead, Steve.
I don't want to say anything. Okay.
No.
So celebrating life on the river, creating a self-sustaining new urban district. These are office buildings, but also there's a variety of mixtures of densities of residential, low, mid, high, villas, shop houses, all kinds of ways of living like we enjoy in the center city. Innovation hubs, office buildings, retail streets, and a system of parks that link everything together. Keep going. Next.
The thing is, in our recent MASTERPLAN projects, we're using, like in this project, we're using the river as a center of development, not the center as development. So we develop everything based on the river. So the river unified, the center of this community. Like back in like thousands of years ago, right, when people lived by the water and they developed their kind of urban center, on the river, even the same way.
Next. Really is all about life on the river. And unlike what we have in District 1, we are bringing people to the riverfront, the river parks, recreation activity. Next. So this is the new urban center of the Asian district. One we hope will inspire new cultural core for that eastern expansion. Next. So again, using central planning, again through our greenways, I won't get into all the detail, but using biomimicry and other methodologies, and preserving and respecting the existing infrastructure of green and incorporating that into new urban. Next. Big issue here is land formation. How do we create resilience in terms of creating land that will sustain the 2050 map that I showed you earlier, where most of this place will end up being underwater at high tide, especially during storm surge levels. So it's a balancing building, creating lakes, and then creating land.
We create this kind of strategy not only for this project, but a lot of, as you see, it's an issue of the land that's living by the water and by the canal. So usually, cut and fill settle up. We be an issue, but we do most classify where the soil gonna fill up the land to begin this. We fill up like 2.5, 3 meters when you get the soil, right? So, and we do that the way that we do cut and fill on sites. So we create water system, we create lakes, reservoirs, all this canal system. Use that soil to really pump up the sites. So you don't have to transport soil from somewhere else to save cost of pressure or
and the water buckets we can use for district cooling. We can cool our buildings with them. There's a lot of advantages. Pretty much balance. And bring to live with nature next. So, and then creating a whole variety of riverfront engagement models. Some of the riverfronts will be urban. A lot of them will retain their natural ability to absorb water during the rainy seasons and things. Next, but it's really learning about living with nature and then building on that and then integrating that into the nature fabric. Next, the key to this whole thing is when we started out, we had no real development program. We said, I think we had a limit of 55 stories on So given the amount of land area, which was about 400 hectares of land, we then sat down and tried to think what is the perfect balance of workplace and living and amenity provision for the overall innovation district. Remember, this is the downtown for a much bigger area. So given our history with these kinds of projects in the past, we then created a very integrated and balanced program site. But beyond that, we also took that program and decided to integrate uses, not only in the same block, but also in the same buildings. You don't need a car in this city to get from where you live to where you work. Even maybe a motor. You can take mechanical bicycles from your place of living to your place. That was our third objective.
Another purpose of this kind of model that we see recently in the downtown area, like past 10 or 5 years, you see people start living in downtown, like Toronto, like 10, 15 years ago. Now downtown is like nobody's there. And now people actually start moving downtown to live. That kind of model and that kind of thinking, and especially Steve mentioned about, kind of low impact on the transportation. So I think it's kind of community trending towards that. So yeah,
so not only is it convenience, but this has to be an exciting place to live. And we all know that from a commercial perspective, shopping, entertainment does not survive on its own. It needs constant football traffic. So we've integrated all of those ideologies into a matrix that we believe would help make this whole project successful from a development perspective. So not only from the environmental perspective, but also from a realistic and development perspective, that's what we do. We take all of those trains of thought, we integrate those perspectives into one common mission. That is really what's going to make a successful expansion of promotion and city. Next. So our plan is a street grid of about 110 by 130 meters, which is not unlike the average street grid in District 1. It has a lot of pedestrian transparency and access through that urban grid, acknowledging all the existing waterways, of course, and then again creating a whole variety of density, workplace, and lifestyle throughout that urban context.
Actually, Steve and I, we learned a lot from Sound Master Plan, which we did back in the 90s. And then the 2C Master Plan came out later on. We learned from those kind of lessons because we've been working on projects. And the Master Plan didn't give investors enough flexibility to do their projects or to execute their projects. So this kind of model, or new modular system, we give them that kind of flexibility to really think about the building typology, what they're going to build, and think about the cost up front, and think about what kind of land uses they're going to develop. So we learn from that. So the master plan that we do is not from the big concept anymore, but that's going to go from this kind of modular system on the building itself and spread it out to the whole master plan. So that is more kind of feasible to office development to investors.
So again, balancing workplace, again, the red is the commercial areas, the yellow is generally the residential. But again, integrating the blocks. We actually don't care if you build office or residential here. Doesn't really matter. What we want to do is create an urban density that promotes a vitality that actually gives credibility to providing the amenities at the street level. We want a 24/7 city. In the long run, whether we get a little more office or a little residential, it doesn't really matter as long as we have not negatively impacted the traffic impacts of the general region, as long as we've attained a very good success with the amenity provision that we're providing, that we're envisioning for this place. We have to make it all work. So if indeed you end up building a little bit more office because the markets are going in that direction, it's not going to upset the entire industry. That's where the flexibility comes into play. Next. And then again, an open space network, a variety of scales. The Tap River is the central river here, which provides most of the project's image and placemaking capacity. A lot of our cultural theaters and cultural provisions are along that river that take the two halves of the city center and merge those together. But then there's a whole network of canal systems that go through the neighborhoods, and even urban parks within the blocks that make a complete and holistic synergy of open space that is integrated in that community. Next. This is it. This is our vision. This is just a vision plan. Yeah, this is the Highway 1 leading toward Saigon. We don't have landmark anyone in the distance yet, but it's back there. But this is our eastern gateway to the future of Ho Chi Minh innovation. So, next.
And just Steve, for me to make a bit of a comment, you start to see with these two projects that those drivers that I was talking about for success are really being applied, right? Whether that's the mobility, the public realm, the mix of uses, and getting the community, that needs those different types of amenities, and that matrix approach, that smart city approach. So all of these drivers that we're talking about we're actually applying to these projects.
That's a good point, Tom. It's a whole different approach that we're taking. It's from the lessons we've learned here since the late 1990s.
Next slide.
It is about respecting nature, but it's not just respecting nature for the sake of that. It's actually looking at nature and how to maximize or capitalize on that experience. Saigon is a city about life on the river. This is the Parisian, image of Asia, but yet we can't reach that riverfront. So everything we do from now on should actually reintroduce that value back into our value and theory. All right, next. Okay, and then next. And again, if you go back one, there's the lake that we're using to create a lot of conservation resource. And then we create a very vibrant urban image.
Into the time.
I think we're over. So you saw a very low scale development. Now you're seeing a very intensive urban scale development. I think it's probably time to fields with questions, with comments.
Right.
So we'd like to open it up to the audience. And, engage all of you.
I surely have another projects to go, but I think it's time to follow up with your question. I just want to capture a bit that we've been doing this kind of theories and biomimicry and all this kind of new thinking over the time in the past few years projects in Vietnam. So we apply this kind of concept in specific projects depends on the local culture, local environment, and the people there. So we open to your questions. Want to know about some other projects, you can always contact us to find out more what we do.
Thank you very much, all of the speaker. I think that we had a very good time that we can sharing and learn a lot from the practical, because from my point of view, I've been very happy because when now I can see that some practical project that we can apply with some theory that I always try to share with our students. But when they graduate, they say that they have no chance to apply for the smart city, not only the technology. They are also thinking about the people, but normally when they are going for the planning, always thinking about how they make the land use, how they make more money for the investor, and they just color the area by painting. So I think it's really very inspiring for all the people that we will have some chance to apply the thinking. Yeah.
That's a really good point in master planning actually. Back in the 90s when we did the master plan for and right now we're using the same concept in selling the products. So they're not selling the apartments, they're not selling villas, they're selling the environment. Right? So that's the key. So there's always balance how you do all this value added to their properties to really maximize the users, maximize the values of the property to sell in the market.
Very important. And those guys back in the 1993 when we first arrived here, those guys were really pioneering. There was nothing there except mud and water. And I just remember kind of sinking up to my knees, walking through the site, getting on boats and you know, sort of making our way around. And I just thought there's no way we could ever build anything here. But now you know, there's a lot of things there. It probably needs to be a little more office space down there. Okay,
Any question, please? Any questions? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Thanks for your sharing. I just want to know the architectural kind of background. So there is we also are selling material design kind of material as well as one. How your sharing is really useful to know about the concept of smart city. From your point of view, can I ask you to please share more a little of your personal perspective towards the project of landmark one, which seems to be the current icon. What would the takeaway lessons from that project? Is it anything to do with, let's say, the mechanical effect on the river kind of flow? And if it was you to design that project,
Well, I think it has a really beautiful window wall. There's a little view I have about the density in a couple ways. I think that they could have done some variation in the surrounding residential towers around the central landmark tower. I've been there many times. I've been up to the top of I've been to the little rooftop bar, and I've never understood how that floor plate actually makes any sense. But anyway, it's an iconic building, okay? But the surrounding residential towers are all the same height. And I don't know if that would be the best investment model if I wouldn't have the ability to change that master plan. I don't think I would have put that out the same way. They almost have a vibrant street life, and they probably could enhance that in that little urban grid of streets that they've created. I think the thing they have going for them is that the metro line ends up submerging itself right at that point. I'm not sure if there's a station there or not, but there should be one because the density has got to be unbelievable. It's got to be an 8-to-1 plot ratio with that area.
I mean, I could understand why they do that, because they kind of try to maximize, the values of the land. Because I think the investor may spend a lot of money upfront already to get the land, so they try to maximize that. But if we could have a chance to do it differently, we will distribute it to the waterfront, because right now it's looking at the density of all these residential towers. That's why the project is good. It's a good project, actually. But it's too much density. That creates this kind of a feeling when you live in that space, you don't feel like you connect to the nature or anything, no matter what. We do differently actually on the Empire City project. On the other side, continue. 15 hectares that we did the master plan, I think 5 years ago. And now we see something start coming up. And the concept that we apply in that project plan, we stepping up from the water, of the riverfront. So we have low rise building at the waterfront. We're stepping up. At the end of the project, it's going to be 88-story tower that we've been doing right now with the investor. So if you see that in the next few years. So that's a totally different look of how we doing this kind of balance in nature, rebuild at buildings.
Yes.
And there's one thing that, that's interesting to talk about when you have a developer that comes in and says, we have to meet this density. We've run into it a lot where you go, well, you want a certain return for your investment on that development, but is that density really the key to getting that return? If you have, residential on the waterfront, for example, that obviously is of higher value than if you're inland. But what is the value of being on a ravine or on a park or on a river or on some other natural system? Right? There is a value to that. And you're seeing that these developers now starting finally to understand that, if you reduce the density and you increase the open space network and you increase the public realm, that there's a value to that. And those units, although your density may be less, but the value or the amount that you can get for those units is going to be a lot more than you would get if you tried to cram it in and just meet that density target. So there's a bit of that understanding and getting to these developers to understand that you need a return. We understand that, but it's not about maximizing the density. You can get that return by creating a good neighborhood with a great open space network with a great public realm.
But again, I don't want to be too hard on them. It's a good point, Tom. I mean, really, it's not just one amenity that we're probably looking at. So we should think about if nothing else, we can create additional amenity that would be part of the next. The one thing about benchmark, what we call benching height, which makes meaning here, you need plot ratio of 8, so you just build all the buildings at 65 stories, right? So I had a similar project in Shanghai, the Xintiandi project, where everything was being built out at 45 stories, plot ratio 4.5 or something like that. What we ended up doing is Ben Wood and I decided we would raise some of the 45-story buildings to 60 and lower some of these other buildings fronting this lake down another 5 or 10 stories. And what we ended up doing is creating the value that we had on the lakefront way back into the site, because now the taller buildings have a view of the lake. It was all about selling a view of the lake. So by stepping the building, we raised the cost of the development because of the taller buildings going to be more expensive to build. But they sold the flats for a higher price. So in the end, they make more money. But in the end, they'll spend more money. So it's you have to think differently.
So I think we have another question from the online.
Okay.
The first question, they're asking about historic values in replacement things, but the preservation of ancient building costs numerous investor expenditure. What solution can be done to address that issue?
The preservation of the story.
Historic is very costly, right? We have the second question from with the technology advancement. What measures should be involved in the urban design to help the plan a smart community providing modern infrastructure and quality of life upgrade?
Well, I'll say globally, the preservation of heritage is expensive not to do. It's expensive to the society. We can't afford to lose all of this heritage that has been so deeply ingrained in, especially a country like Vietnam. Actually, if you think about Japan, who's a society that was closed off for 200 years, not through war or anything. They just closed themselves off to the world for 200 years. They developed a culture that is so unique in the world. Vietnam is almost the same. But we have been the opposite of being closed off from the world. In fact, we've been invaded by every possible entity that had some objective in Southeast Asia, right? So why are they the same? We've developed a very unique culture here, and we can't destroy that history. We should be proud of that history and bank on that history. To destroy that is more expensive than preserve. Okay. Yeah, next one.
With the
Technology.
technology advancement.
Yeah.
What measures should be involved in the urban design to help the plan a smart community providing modern infrastructure and quality of life upgrades?
Okay, we're actually we're using some new technologies coming out of America called I think it's called Streetwise. We're looking at some new AI formulations that can model density for us, where we can then insert a number of parameters, and we can predict both the physical nature of the densities and the returns. We're automating a lot of that. That doesn't take the creative process away from urban design. We still have objectivity that we must impart to create the form of that city as we go forward. But we are entertaining those new ideas.
The next question number 3. Yes, we always try to keep the balance. I mean, we respect the nature, we work with the nature, but it has to be always the balance between the cost and how we try to respect that kind of environment and nature. And of course, at the end of the day, who's going to pay for that project? Yeah. So it has always the balance. We maintain the value that we get from the environment and the value that we going to spend to build the project. So it has to be kind of really selective process of how we do things. So we cannot go to 100% to, okay, we cannot really think we have to respect the nature and so on. No, it has to be always the balance and how we look in different perspectives.
Actually, on question number 3, I lived in Hong Kong for 20 years before moving here. We channelized every stream coming out of every part of every mountain that we possibly could, because we thought we were going to develop the entire place. But we ultimately realized we couldn't do that. And so ultimately what we have to do is come back and reopen those stream beds. And again, let the natural water cycles come back into play. Talk about expensive. Channelizing stream is much more expensive than building bridges. I can tell you that. Now, because once you channelize a stream bed, you also have to maintain it. nature does a pretty good job of taking care of itself. So the more pavement we put down on the ground, the more responsibility we take on to manage that. Okay, so I think to answer question number 3 a little bit, you really have to balance. Look, what do we really want to control, and what kind of balance do we really want to take on? I think we really ought to be a bit more respectful of nature and just start to focus on those things that we know we can win.
Okay, I think now it's
Yes.
Good morning, ladies. Thank you very much. To be here, thanks. The operation should be here, very great. Actually, I was for you, but I would share my observation related to your subject. What I would actually do, you have I'm looking at one different theology. And when I'm changing, you're not really zero. Because when you work on the time, you're not scientific capable, see the right on the time. Over 40% area of work on the time will be done. And over 25% of relationship interest. And on the system, yeah, 30% area of relationship interest. Because when you have 3 minor problems. First, environmental pollution. The government of Vietnam spent a lot of money and a lot of time. But when you have, can help you solve the problem.
Thank you for that.
I think that
It's
we have,
inspiring.
I think that we will come up with a lot of the questions and also the information that we got from the sharing from our 3 experienced speaker. But I think now is the time we have to wrap up because that we also run out of the time. So I think for this webinar, from my point of view, that we also can see that some highlights that we can see. The first one is the most important thing for all of the thing for the design is the human centered. And all kind of the city style, like the smart city or the other city, just want to go to make the upgrade or the quality of people's lives. So the people should be a center. So the people now, they already want to back to the center. So that's why we have to make the balance. And the second thing that I can get from the point of all of our speakers, that we do the design, but we not make only the design. We make the integration between all of the field and all of the aspect and all of the labor. And they just visualize the design of that and make the people quality of life improve and go with the sustainable development. So I think it's really the direction that from not only the be a place want to go forward. We also from the education also want to go for that. So I think it's a really very interesting webinar that we can learn that from the practical we can see how it's going on and improve for the Vietnam quality of life. And thank you very much for all of attendance here to listen and sharing, and all of your questions you also can raising, and we will give the feedback later on. And for the other people go offline here, we also have the tea break outside, and we also can do the networking and maybe more questions and more discussion and so can rising. And not only end for this webinar, I also want to say that from the Smart City Plus 2021 from ISCM with the other partner, we will have the many series, different activity, not only webinar, studio, project and research that you also can find more information in our ISCM website and fan page. And we really welcome all of you to participate, not only attendees, you also can share your thoughts and also can raise with some other issue, or maybe you also can say that I want to share some topic with us. We also been very willing to welcome all of you. So thank you very much one more time, and hope that you can have a very nice day and a good journey in ahead. Thank you very much.